Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods. We'll be pulling out some of the really fascinating bits, the anomalies and mysteries that kind of challenge the standard history we all learned.
Yeah, the core idea we're exploring, the one Hancock really pushes in these early chapters, is this. Could there have been, a really advanced civilization much, much earlier than we think? We're going to look at the evidence he lines up, trying to connect the dots for you, focusing on those aha moments without getting totally swamped in detail.
Okay, let's start with something that really makes you pause these ancient maps. Hancock kicks off with the Piri Reis map from 1513. And this isn't just some vague sketch.
No, not at all. What's stunning is how accurately it seems to show Antarctica. And importantly, not just the continent itself, which, wasn't officially found until the 1800s,
Right.
but it specifically shows the coast of Queen Maud Land, apparently without its ice cap.
Exactly. And that's the kicker, isn't it? Because modern science, like the surveys done in 1949, confirmed that area has been under deep ice for something like 6,000 years. It hasn't been ice-free since way back then.
Yet this map seems to show it as it was thousands of years ago.
So how does Hancock explain that?
Well, Piri Reis himself wrote on the map that he didn't draw it all from scratch. He said he compiled it from lots of older source maps. Some were recent, from explorers like Columbus.
Okay.
But others, he claimed, went back to the 4th century BC, or maybe even earlier. So that's the first sort of fingerprint Hancock points to, this knowledge that just seems impossible for the time.
So someone, somewhere, somehow mapped an ice-free part of Antarctica thousands of years before we officially knew it existed. And it wasn't just Piri Reis.
That's the argument. Hancock stresses this wasn't a one-off. He brings in the work of Charles Hapgood, who studied these maps extensively. Apparently, Hapgood discussed this with a cartographer, Arlington Mallory, back in 1960. And Mallory pointed out that these maps seemed to show the subglacial topography, basically, the land hidden under the ice. And later seismic surveys actually confirmed that the shape shown on the old maps was accurate.
Wow. Okay. So multiple map makers might have had access to this same seemingly ancient information.
It suggests a shared source, yeah. And Hancock links this to other evidence, too.
Like what?
Like sediment cores pulled from the Ross Sea floor. This was during the Byrd expedition in '49. These samples showed layers of fine-grained sediment, the kind laid down by rivers flowing off temperate, ice-free land.
So physical evidence backing up the idea that Antarctica was warmer and potentially mapped back then, maybe around 4000 BC, as Hancock suggests.
Exactly. It fits the picture of a map drawn during an ice-free period.
It's just hard to wrap your head around. I mean, think about what accurate map making involves, even later on. Big expeditions, advanced math.
Oh, absolutely. And crucially, chronometers for finding longitude accurately. That was a huge hurdle, only really solved with Harrison's chronometer in the late 1700s. Yet these earlier maps seem to have a precision, especially with longitude, that just shouldn't have been possible back then, according to the standard view of history.
And didn't someone at MIT look into this?
Yeah, Professor Richard Srachan, he evaluated Hapgood's map collection and apparently concluded that whoever made the original source maps needed some seriously advanced mathematics. He even suggested a projection similar to Mercator's.
Centuries before Mercator.
Centuries before him, yeah. So the takeaway isn't just, here's an old map, it's the implication of this incredibly advanced geographical knowledge, seemingly passed down maybe from a civilization that thrived during the last ice age, one that's just not in our history books.
Okay, so that's the maps. But Hancock doesn't stop there. The book then moves on to other weird findings, other potential fingerprints of lost knowledge, like the Nazca lines in Peru.
Ah, yes, huge drawings, geoglyphs etched into the desert. So big you really only grasp them from the air.
Which obviously wasn't an option back then.
Right. Hancock describes them as looking almost like a giant cipher, geometric patterns, animal shapes, repeating but in different sizes. And interestingly, some early Spanish chroniclers link them to the Viracochas, these mysterious figures we'll probably talk more about.
It suggests planning on a massive scale, maybe even a technology we don't understand. And then there's the stonework in South America, especially in Cusco.
Oh, the Inca stonework is phenomenal. You see these Spanish colonial buildings sitting right on top of these massive Inca foundations, and the contrast in skill is just striking.
How so?
Well, the Inca walls, especially the polygonal ones, are built from these huge irregular stones, but they're fitted together perfectly. like a jigsaw puzzle, with multiple angles, no mortar at all. It's incredibly
Like
precise.
that famous 12-angled stone.
Exactly. That kind of work, Hancock argues, implies centuries of know-how, a deep understanding of geometry and stoneworking that seems almost out of place. It hints at a really sophisticated level of engineering.
Almost like a lost technology or method. And this connects to the legends of Viracocha.
Yes, this figure, Viracocha, pops up all over South American mythology. He's often described consistently, a tall, pale, bearded man, a kind of civilizing hero who taught arts and sciences, performed miracles.
A teacher figure.
A teacher, a lawgiver, and significantly, he's often said to have departed across the sea, sometimes with hints of using science or magic. Hancock sees these widespread, similar legends as possible echoes, memories of an actual advanced group or culture that influenced the region long ago.
Interesting. Okay, from Peru, the book takes us higher, up to Lake Titicaca and the ruins of Tiahuanaco on the Altiplano. That place has a strange feel, doesn't it?
It really does. It's incredibly high, desolate, and one of the most striking things about Tiahuanaco is the evidence suggesting it used to be a port city right on Lake Titicaca.
But it's not now.
No. The ruins are now about 12 miles away from the current shore and over 100 feet higher up.
Wow. So either the lake dropped massively or the land rose significantly.
Exactly. A major geological change is implied, something perhaps more sudden than gradual processes would suggest. And Hancock draws an interesting parallel here, connecting South America to Egypt.
Wow.
He compares the story of the Egyptian god Osiris, who was tricked, sealed in a chest, and thrown into the Nile, with stories about Thunupa Viracocha in South America.
Okay.
Both were great civilizers, both were conspired against, struck down, and set adrift in some kind of vessel. Finding these similar narrative patterns across oceans is, well, suggestive, isn't it?
It is. And the site itself, Tiahuanaco, has some very strange features. You mentioned the Viracocha temple.
Right, the subterranean temple, it has these dozens of sculpted heads, all different types sticking out of the walls, very enigmatic. Then there's the Kalasasaya enclosure.
It's the place of the standing stones.
Yes, with its huge monoliths, including one depicting a giant figure,
Yeah.
and the Acapana pyramid nearby. It's heavily damaged now because people used it as a quarry, but its original stepped form, and crucially, this complex system of internal stone channels zigzagging down, designed to sluice water. Hancock speculates it might have been more than just a pyramid, maybe some kind of sophisticated device.
A device. And this is where the dating gets really controversial, right? Professor Poznansky.
You're Poznansky, yeah. He spent decades studying Tiahuanaco. He used archaeoastronomy, looking at the alignments of the structures, particularly within the Kalasaya, relative to the stars.
And what did he conclude?
Based on calculations involving the obliquity of the ecliptic, that's basically the tilt of the Earth's axis, which changes very slowly over millennia.
Okay, like a long-term wobble.
Exactly. He argued the alignments at Tiahuanaco matched the sky as it would have looked around 15,000 BC.
15,000 BC. That's massively earlier than mainstream archaeology, except for a major civilization there.
Hugely earlier. It pushes things deep into the last ice age. Now, his dating is debated, of course, but it's a key part of Hancock's argument about extreme antiquity.
And what about the statues found there? You mentioned El Fraile.
Right, inside the Kalasaya. El Fraile is this strange, sort of humanoid but androgynous figure, very large eyes and lips, holding some kind of wavy knife and what looks like.
Well, Hancock describes it as a case-bound book with some kind of device sticking out of it.
Yeah,
Very peculiar.
definitely sounds strange. And the Gateway of the Sun, that has some significant carvings too, doesn't it?
Immensely significant, according to Hancock. The frieze across the top is incredibly detailed. There's a central figure, often identified as Viracocha, and repeating motifs. But what really stands out are depictions of animals that seem out of place.
Like elephants.
Exactly. There's a carving that looks unmistakably like an elephant's head, trunk, tusks, ears. Now, obviously, no elephants in South America in historical times.
But there were prehistoric ones.
Yes. Creatures like Cuvironius, a gomphothere, which did live in South America but went extinct around 10,000 BC. The carving looks remarkably like it.
So the implication is the carving was made when these animals still existed.
That's the suggestion. And it's not just the elephant. The frieze also apparently shows 46 heads of Toxodon, another extinct animal.
Another large South American mammal, also extinct since about the 11th millennium BC. Seeing these accurately depicted, Hancock argues, means the artists must have seen them alive, pushing the date for Tiahuanaco's origins way back.
And Poznansky also found evidence of a cataclysm.
Yeah, he believed Tijuana was destroyed by a massive flood. And interestingly, there's also evidence nearby of really sophisticated ancient agriculture techniques to detoxify poisonous plants. And these raised fields called waru waru that were incredibly productive, perhaps developed to cope with climate changes.
And local legends remember the builders as the Viracocha people.
That's what Hancock notes, tying it back to those civilizer myths.
Okay, so from Tiahuanaco, the book heads north to Mexico and Central America. We encounter the plumed serpent figure here.
Right. Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Kukulkan for the Maya. The journey takes us to places like Chichen Itza. The temple of Kukulkan there is amazing.
The pyramid.
Yeah, the main pyramid. It's basically a stone calendar. 365 steps for the days of the year. And on the equinoxes, the sun casts shadows that make it look like a giant serpent is undulating down the staircase. Incredible precision.
And the Aztecs had myths about previous ages, right? A fifth sun.
Yes, the sun of movement, which they believed would end through earthquakes. And they dated the start of this current age to somewhere in the 4th millennium BC.
So another hint of deep time. And Quetzalcoatl, how does he compare to Viracocha?
Very similar descriptions, actually. Hancock emphasizes this. Quetzalcoatl is also often described as pale, bearded, a teacher arriving in a time of darkness. His names, like Kukulkan or Gukumats, all mean plumed serpent, just like Viracocha sometimes had serpent associations.
And there were others.
Yeah, related figures in Mayan lore, like Votan and Itzamana, also sometimes described as pale, bearded signalizers, often linked to serpents. It's this recurring pattern that Hancock finds so suggestive of a shared ancient influence.
It really is a strong recurring theme. It makes you lament the loss of all those ancient books the Spanish destroyed.
Oh, absolutely. The burning of the Mayan codices by figures like Bishop Diego de Landa was a tragedy. We lost countless records of their history, science, mythology. Ironically, de Landa himself later tried to record some of the traditions he helped destroy.
Small comfort. Hancock also mentions the Tower of Babel story.
Yeah, briefly, suggesting it might be another distorted memory of a time when humanity perhaps shared a common origin or language, stemming from this proposed earlier civilization before being scattered. Another potential fingerprint.
Then we get to the Olmecs. They seem to sort of appear out of nowhere.
That's one of the big mysteries surrounding them. They emerge in Mesoamerica around 1500 BC, seemingly with a fully formed, sophisticated culture. There's no clear developmental phase found before that.
And they're known for those giant stone heads.
Those colossal heads, yeah. Many have distinctly African-like or Negroid features, which is itself a puzzle in pre-Columbian America. The one found by Sterling at Tres Zapotes is a famous example. They also built huge earthworks, like the mound at San Lorenzo.
And Hancock points out some odd parallels with ancient Egypt.
He does. Things like a ritual similar to the Egyptian opening of the mouth ceremony, meant to give life to statues or mummies, and ideas about dead kings being reborn as stars.
Interesting. And that carving at La Venta?
The man and serpent relief, yeah. Some interpret it symbolically, but Hancock suggests it looks like someone operating controls inside a machine or vehicle. He uses it to bolster the idea of lost high technology.
So the Olmecs, like the early Egyptians, seem to spring into existence remarkably developed.
That abruptness is key for Hancock. It doesn't fit the standard model of slow, gradual evolution of civilizations. He sees it as another sign they might have inherited knowledge or culture from an earlier source.
And more parallels in afterlife beliefs.
Yes, striking similarities between ancient Mesoamerican and Egyptian views of the underworld having 9 levels, the soul journeying by boat, specific gods accompanying the dead.
What about those Monte Alban sculptures?
Right, the danzantes. Often interpreted as slain enemies, but Hancock points out some seem to depict various old world racial types, which is anomalous for that time and place in the New World.
And the Olmecs and Maya had sophisticated math and calendars.
Extremely. They used a bar and dot system for calculations, understood the concept of zero, and developed incredibly accurate calendars, including the long count, which famously had a cycle ending in 2012.
Where did that knowledge come from?
Well, Hancock proposes it could be a legacy, an inheritance passed down through millennia, perhaps through secret societies or wisdom traditions associated with figures like Quetzalcoatl, remnants of that lost civilization.
He connects this to creation myths too, right? Popol Vuh and Genesis.
Yeah, he draws a parallel. Both stories, in a way, talk about humanity's early state involving extraordinary knowledge, godlike powers, almost followed by a fall or intervention because humans knew too much. The Popol Vuh describes the first men as great astronomers and geographers who could see and understand everything.
Until the gods dimmed their sight.
Exactly. It echoes that theme of ancient high knowledge being lost or suppressed.
And the Maya themselves present contradictions, don't they?
They do. Hancock highlights this. They had incredibly advanced astronomy and mathematics, could conceptualize eternity with their calendar, but didn't widely use the wheel for practical purposes or build the true arch. They could count in millions, but didn't seem to have simple scales for weighing goods.
So it looks like knowledge that was maybe received, but not fully integrated or developed organically.
That's the interpretation he leans towards. And since the Maya got their calendar from the Olmecs, it pushes the question back. Where did the Olmecs get it? What level of technology is really needed to develop such a complex astronomical calendar?
In Teotihuacan, the city layout.
Another puzzle. The alignment of its main structures, the citadel, the pyramid of the sun, the pyramid of the moon, along the street of the dead Hancock suggests it might encode astronomical information, perhaps even reflecting knowledge of planets beyond Saturn, unknown to modern science until much later.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping up this first half, Hancock is really weaving together threads from maps, architecture, mythology, astronomy across continents.
Exactly. He's suggesting potential for ancient links, maybe not direct contact between Egypt and Mexico in, say, 1000 BC, but a shared inheritance from a much older common source civilization, one with advanced science and global reach. He even notes that the Aztecs found Teotihuacan already in ruins and believed it was built by giants in a previous age to transform men into gods. He also briefly mentions the number pi appearing in some ancient contexts, hinting at sophisticated mathematical understanding.
So it's a lot of anomalies stacked together. The impossible maps showing Antarctica ice-free, the incredibly precise stonework, these recurring myths of pale, bearded civilizers.
The sudden appearance of complex cultures like the Olmecs and Egyptians, the advanced astronomy and mathematics seemingly out of time and place.
It definitely challenges the conventional timeline. And this second part, it takes us on a bit of a wild ride, doesn't it? Time, continents.
Definitely.
We're looking at incredible astronomical stuff in Central American temples, the sheer scale and mystery of the Egyptian pyramids, and this really mind-boggling idea of a lost global civilization possibly linked to, well, what's now frozen Antarctica.
It's going to be interesting. We should get some real aha moments trying to connect these dots.
Go for it.
What's really compelling, I think, is how Hancock tries to link these cultures that seem so separate.
Yeah.
He's suggesting this shared inheritance, maybe a common source of knowledge that, well, mainstream history hasn't quite grappled with.
Right.
So hit sites like Tiwanaku and Nazca in South America, then jump to Central America, the Olmecs, the Maya.
And then Egypt, of course, all while keeping those strange Antarctic maps in mind.
Exact.
Okay, so let's jump right into part 3. Central America, the plumed serpent. And right off the bat, we hit the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza. This, well, it's more than just stones, isn't it?
Oh, far more. It's the precision that's stunning. Its alignment with the cosmos. I mean, during the equinoxes, sunlight and shadow literally make it look like a serpent is slithering down the pyramid side.
Wow.
And then, yeah, the 365 steps, clearly marking the days of the solar year. It just speaks to this really deep astronomical understanding.
And it gets even more thought-provoking when you look at the Mesoamerican idea of the fifth sun. These prophecies about Earth shifts and destruction dated way back, like 4th millennium BC.
It really makes you wonder about their grasp of these huge cosmic cycles. Where did that knowledge come from?
Exactly.
And then you get Quetzalcoatl, the main god figure in ancient Mexico. And the similarities to Viracocha down in the Andes are, well, they're pretty hard to ignore.
Pale-skinned, bearded,
Yeah.
the civilizer type figure.
Consistently described that way, yeah. And they both share this plumed serpent thing. Quetzalcoatl is also Cucumatz, Kukulkan, all mean the same thing.
Plus, you see similar figures, pale, bearded serpent gods like Votan and Samarna, the Maya too. It feels like more than just coincidence.
It does seem that way. And tragically, so much potential evidence was lost when the Spanish destroyed those ancient Central American codices.
Ah, yeah.
We can only guess what records of ages past they held. Maybe they explain these connections, this knowledge.
Then the book shifts focus to the Olmecs. They kind of pop up, middle of the 2nd millennium BC almost. Fully formed.
It's strange, isn't it? There's not much sign of a slow buildup in the archaeology. And those massive, distinctive Negroid head carvings. Where did that style come from so suddenly?
Total mystery. And the planning in sites like San Lorenzo, it implies sophisticated engineering, social structure right from the get-go.
It does. And Hancock points out some interesting parallels with ancient Egypt. Things like the opening of the mouth ritual, the king being reborn as a star.
Makes you wonder. Some shared idea. Influence.
It certainly puts that possibility on the table. Look at the man and serpent relief at La Venta. Hancock questions if that headdress is just ceremonial or maybe functional, even technological. And this rapid development, Olmecs in early Egypt, both seemingly appearing fully formed without clear local precursors, it's a significant puzzle.
And don't forget the Olmec calendar predicting that world-ending thing in 2012. That focus on time seems to carry through to the Maya.
Exactly. The Maya were obsessed with time. Their astrocalendrical system was incredibly complex, incredibly accurate.
Yeah.
But then they apparently didn't have things like the true arch or the wheel for practical use. It just, again, begs that question. Did they inherit a specific body of knowledge focused maybe just on the heavens?
Then there's Teotihuacan. Massive city. Builders unknown. Even the Aztecs thought it was ancient.
Yeah, legends of giants building it to turn men into gods. Pretty wild stuff.
But the layout itself's the scale.
That's what really grabs you. The possibility it encodes advanced astronomy. Some researchers even think the alignments might show knowledge of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto way, way before we discovered them.
It just keeps pushing that question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Some ancient connection, Mexico and Egypt maybe, a shared legacy from someone else?
It's the thread Hancock keeps pulling. And it's not just stars. He mentions finding the mathematical constant pi in ancient measurements too, suggesting, a level of science we don't usually associate with antiquity.
Which ties into the next big theme, right? Part 4, the deluge. These global flood myths.
Yeah, it's remarkable how widespread they are. Cultures with supposedly no contact, all telling similar stories of a massive flood.
You've got Gilgamesh at Napishtim in Mesopotamia.
Right. Then Central America, the Mechoacaniseks, Tesbe. Even the Hopi and Aztec traditions talk about multiple world destructions.
And the core elements keep repeating.
They do. Divine warning, a chosen survivor builds a boat or ark, takes animals, repopulates the earth. It really suggests some kind of massive traumatic event imprinted itself on human memory everywhere.
And not just floods, right? The book mentions other catastrophes in these old stories.
Exactly. Darkness, the sun and moon acting weird, planets changing course, earthquakes, fire. It paints a picture of a really unstable, potentially terrifying ancient world.
So how does this connect to actual evidence?
Well, that leads into looking at the end of the last ice age, around the 11th millennium BC. There's evidence for really rapid, catastrophic environmental shifts then.
Like the frozen mammoth.
Precisely. Temperate adapted animals found flash frozen in Siberia. It points to an incredibly sudden, drastic climate change.
Wow.
Plus, Ice Age volcanism seems to have been way more intense than anything modern. And then the ice sheets melting so fast between 15,000 and 8,000 BC.
Raising sea levels massively. That alone would be a global catastrophe.
Absolutely. A truly global event.
Okay, so moving into Part V, messages for the future. This gets into some really interesting territory about myths maybe being more than just stories.
Right. Hancock brings in Giorgio di Santillana's theory. The idea that ancient myths might actually encode technical jargon from an advanced astronomical science, specifically about the precession of the equinoxes.
Okay, precession. Let's write that down. It's the Earth's slow wobble, like a spinning top.
Exactly. It takes about 26,000 years for one full wobble. And over that time, it slowly changes which star is the North Star and when constellations rise at certain times of the year, like the spring equinox.
So it's a super long-term cycle.
Very long. And de Santillana, with Hertha von Dachshund in Hamlet's Mill, argued that myths about things like a cosmic tree or a mill of the gods found worldwide aren't just random tales. They're allegories describing this slow, processional movement.
Like a code.
A way to preserve and transmit complex astronomical knowledge across generations, maybe through times when writing wasn't common or was lost.
And Jane B. Sellers found specific numbers linked to precession 360, 72, 30, 12, actually embedded within the Egyptian Osiris myth.
Yeah, suggesting deliberate placement by people who understood this stuff, like leaving clues.
Why encode it that way, though, in myths?
Perhaps for resilience. Myths survive even when civilizations collapse or records are destroyed. The core knowledge could persist in the stories. Hancock also links the cycle of ice ages, potentially, to precession, hinting maybe the ancients knew about these long climate patterns, too.
Which brings us back to Egypt and the Great Pyramid. Hancock talks about climbing it at night, which, okay, maybe not advisable.
Definitely not. But his point was the sheer precision. Why build something so incredibly accurate, so perfectly aligned if it was just a tomb for a pharaoh built by, a supposedly primitive workforce?
Seems like overkill.
It does. And there are weird things like those bigger blocks higher up at the 35th course. It kind of goes against basic engineering sense. Why make it harder?
Plus, the alignment to true north is almost perfect, and the math and its dimensions, hinting at pi. It feels intentional, like it's meant to convey something.
Which leads right into Robert Bauval's Orion correlation theory.
Right, the idea that the three Giza pyramids map the stars in Orion's belt.
But crucially, not Orion's belt as it looked during the Pyramid Age, around 2500 BC. Bauval argues the layout matches how those stars looked much earlier, around 10,450 BC, because of precession.
Whoa, okay, that implies a lot, like knowledge of precession way back then.
Exactly. And the ability to plan and lay out a monument complex to reflect that specific ancient date.
And the pyramid texts themselves have oddities, like mentioning iron, which was supposed to be rare then.
That, and describing Sirius as a dual entity, which is weird because Sirius B, its companion star, is invisible without telescopes. How could they possibly know that?
So many questions. Hancock also brings up Manetho's king lists.
Yeah, the Egyptian priest historian. His lists suggest a really long history before the pharaohs we know, hinting at civilized people in Egypt long before 3100 BC. It pushes the timeline way back.
And Thoth, the god of knowledge, wisdom, he sounds a bit like Osiris, another bringer of civilization.
There are definite overlaps. And then you have sites like the Osirian at Abydos. The construction there is massive, megalithic. It feels much older than the dynastic temples around it, even though it's officially attributed to Seti's Teeth.
Plus those ancient boats they found buried nearby. Sea-going vessels, 5,000 years old.
Suggests pretty advanced maritime skills early on. Hancock also notes evidence for really early agriculture blooming in Egypt right around the end of the Ice Age, maybe spurred by new ideas coming in from somewhere.
Then we get the really controversial idea about the Sphinx, water erosion.
John Anthony West, building on Schwaller de Lubitsch's work, they argue the erosion patterns on the Sphinx and its enclosure aren't wind and sand, but heavy rainfall.
Which hasn't happened like that in Egypt for
thousands of years. They argue it pushes the Sphinx's construction back before 10,000 BC into a much wetter climatic period, which implies a high civilization existed then.
And West saw two building phases in the nearby Khafre pyramid too, right? An older megalithic phase.
Yeah, hinting maybe the core structures at Giza are much older than we think.
So how could knowledge survive that long? Thousands of years.
Hancock stresses the power of oral tradition, secret societies, mythology. Ideas can be incredibly resilient, passed down through symbols and stories.
And the Great Pyramid again. Its dimensions matching the Earth's scale, 1.43200.
Yeah.
Acting like a map projection.
It's another piece of the puzzle suggesting sophisticated geodetic knowledge.
To Bauval's core idea, Giza is intentionally designed to mirror Orion in 10,450 BC. Requires knowing precession.
Yeah.
Suggests a very advanced group there at that time.
It's a powerful argument that someone around 10,450 BC understood these long cycles and deliberately froze that moment in time using monuments.
But that's 8,000 years before the pyramids were supposedly built. How does that work?
Bauval suggests maybe a dedicated cult, a wisdom tradition, kept this knowledge alive, passing it down until the time was right to build the monuments. He even wonders if the pyramids weren't tombs at all, but like an eternal machine built to make future generations ask questions.
Huh. An eternal machine.
I
like that. He also briefly links the age of Taurus, around 4400 to 2200 BC, to when dynastic Egypt really kicks off with all the bull worship.
Yeah, another hint at astronomical ages potentially aligning with major cultural shifts.
Okay, that brings us to part 6, Antarctica, the search for a lost homeland.
Right. Hancock confronts the problem. Continents don't just sink. It's geophysically pretty much impossible.
So what's the alternative?
He introduces Charles Hapgood's theory of Earth crust displacement, supported, surprisingly, by Einstein.
Seriously, Einstein backed this.
He wrote the foreword to Hapgood's book, yeah. The idea is the Earth's entire outer crust, the lithosphere, can sometimes slip or shift over the softer layer beneath, the asthenosphere. Meaning Antarctica might not have always been at the South Pole. It could have been further north in a temperate zone.
Wow. Is there actual evidence for that?
Well, there's geological evidence, fossilized trees found near the pole, evidence Antarctica wasn't heavily glaciated before the Eocene, millions of years ago, signs of warmer seas, vegetation,
And the maps again, piri res orientes finis.
showing Antarctica's coast, even some subglacial features without ice, which suggests mapping happened before the current ice sheet formed, maybe before 4000 BC when conditions were ice-free.
That's a pretty specific.
And sediment cores from the Ross Sea show river deposits, meaning flowing rivers, so no ice, before about 4000 BC. It all points to a radically different Antarctic past.
Could a crustal shift have caused the end of the Ice Age? Or been caused by it?
Hancock discusses that possibility, catastrophic global geological events triggering a shift. He even looks at myths from India, Persia, describing lands with weird day-night cycles, maybe distorted memories of polar regions shifting latitude.
And the North Pole is still moving slightly today, right?
It is, suggesting the crust might still be in motion. Hancock's point here is that our view of history, especially pre-writing, might be heavily edited, potentially downplaying huge catastrophes.
Okay, so the final part, part 7, the legacy. It asks a great question.
Yeah. If our civilization was facing the end, how would we try to leave a message for the distant future?
How would we preserve our knowledge?
Hancock suggests maybe the ancients faced that, and maybe they used multiple methods, building enduring monuments like arcs, encoding data in myths, setting up wisdom cults, creating structures designed to make people thousands of years later stop and think, and ask questions.
And the warnings, the messages encoded, maybe they're about these recurring global disasters.
That's the implication, like the Hopi tradition of world ages ending in fire or flood. Cyclical destruction and renewal.
So the book ends leaving you with this image. A lost advanced civilization. And their fingerprints are scattered everywhere in maps, myths, monuments, geology.
Waiting to be fully understood, yeah.
So, wrapping up this deep dive on the second half, we've covered a lot. Those weirdly accurate ancient maps.
The astronomical genius in Central America, the sheer scale and precision in Egypt.
Global flood myths backed by hints of real catastrophes.
Knowledge of things like precession potentially encoded in myths and monuments.
The whole Giza Enigma, Orion, the Sphinx, the 10,450 BC date.
And finally, the mind-bending possibility of Antarctica having shifted, mapped when it was ice-free.
And it all circles back to that central question Hancock poses. Was there a globally advanced civilization during the Ice Age? One whose legacy got fragmented, lost, misunderstood.
That's the core thesis we've unpacked.
It definitely leaves you thinking. What if all these unexplained bits of the ancient world aren't just random weirdness? What if they're echoes? Echoes of a really sophisticated past we've forgotten.
A past that could seriously change how we see human history, and maybe even our own potential.
Something to mull over.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope it sparks your curiosity to maybe check out the source material yourself and, keep questioning.